I'm a small, meek male rabbit living in England. I won't disclose the exact city or even region for obvious reasons, but I always felt extremely fortunate to live where I live. It's a peaceful place, the kind of place where you can go on a midnight walk through deserted streets with headphones in your ears and not worry about a thing. At least, that's what I thought for 19 years of my life, and I had no reason to think otherwise. Despite being small and vulnerable, I have never been bothered or harassed by anyone. That is, until that fateful day that changed everything. It's been a whole year since it happened, but I still don't dare walk alone at night, let alone with headphones in my ears. And I doubt this is going to change anytime soon, if ever. But I digress. Let's get on with the story. I was studying mathematics at university at the time. I was in my second year. Now, just to be clear, the uni I went to wasn't in my hometown. It was in a different town, a little ways off to the east. But it was still in the same general region of the UK. During my first year, I was very careful and vigilant, but soon became accustomed to the new place and dropped my guard, figuring it was just as safe as my hometown. And honestly, perhaps it was. Maybe I just got unlucky on that day, but it changed my view of the world forever. The house I lived at during the second year of my studies was about an hour's walk away from uni. Of course, I would have never moved there if I expected to be walking. I used to ride to and from uni on my bicycle, but just at the beginning of my second year of studies, I got into a minor accident. It was nothing too serious, but it made me lose trust in my bicycle. It made me realize that I really don't have much control over what happens to me on the road. I'm placing my trust in all the other drivers, in the traction of my wheels, and if one of these things fail for whatever reason, I could be in real trouble, and no flimsy paperweight helmet is going to save me. Thanks to that little epiphany, I was scared to ride my bicycle, and I absolutely despised buses, so I had to walk. Especially since walking wasn't even that much slower than the buses, due to the route not being direct and the buses stopping every few steps. I didn't hate it, surprisingly. Yes, an hour's walk one way and then back was tiring, but I got to walk through some nice wooded areas, and I found the walks generally soothing. It was the perfect way to de-stress after a full day of classes and arrive at home with a clear head and a pleasantly tired body. After all, I was always a pretty active rabbit. I need my daily exercise, or I get cranky. So, it was the middle of winter, and I had just finished a particularly nasty day. Not only did I have non-stop lectures from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., with a break for lunch, of course. Most of them weren't even lectures at all, but workshops, which I hated with a passion. I much preferred to just sit in the corner of a lecture theater and daydream. I hated being given a bunch of questions and having to answer them with someone constantly looking over my shoulder. It was especially bad when the questions related to material covered in a previous lecture I had earlier in the day, and I didn't yet have time to digest it all. I'm not a good listener. No matter how much you try to explain things to me, it won't help. I learn best when I'm left alone with a problem and can ponder on it and research it in peace. When the day finally came to an end, I was a wreck. Social interaction always drained me. I walked out of the library and was instantly greeted by a cold winter wind. I breathed it in deeply, finding it soothing, a welcome relief from the stuffy air of the library, which smelled of paper and fur and anxiety. It wasn't often that I had to walk back home at night. Usually my lectures ended before it got dark, but I was always glad when they didn't. Yes, I loved night walks. I loved how quiet and mysterious and spooky everything was. And if spookiness was what I wanted, it was spookiness I got that day. More of it than I bargained for. The walk started off like any other. I crossed the road, which was unpleasantly cold and hard under my unprotected paws, then started walking along the pedestrian path running alongside the road, which was bare earth rather than tarmac, though in this temperature it was just as hard and just as cold. Down the hill my uni was on I went, and once I reached the bottom, I noticed an opossum just standing there, on the other side of the road, waiting for someone probably, too lazy to climb the hill. What struck me as odd was how intently he stared at me. Embarrassed at having made eye contact with a stranger, I looked down at my paws and inadvertently started walking faster. It didn't even strike me as creepy the way he looked at me. I was much too embarrassed to think of that back then, His gaze was alarmingly intense. His pupils narrowed to slits. Or perhaps I have noticed but didn't think much of it. After all, there could be a rational explanation for why he stared at me the way he did. Maybe I reminded him of someone he didn't like. Or maybe he was just staring into space, thinking of something unpleasant. And I happened to walk into his line of sight. Either way, I just kept walking and didn't look back. After a few turns, I crossed the railway and found myself walking down a narrow path with thick bushes to my left and a high fence to my right. Beyond the fence was an empty field. I had my headphones in, as always. I believe I was listening to some creepypastas. What better time to listen to them than during a night walk? It was the perfect atmosphere. The path was quite long and would open up onto a small wooded area close to home. As I walked down the path, my senses were alert from the creepy stories I was listening to. Well, except my hearing, of course. The headphones blocked out most sounds of the outside world. But my big rabbit ears still picked up the loud snap of a dried-up twig some way behind me. Nothing weird about that. Someone was simply walking along the same path as me. But I've already been feeling uneasy the past few minutes. Could have been from the spooky stories or something else. But it made me discreetly pause the podcast. Footsteps behind me. Moving fast, but muffled. I discreetly removed one of my earphones. The footsteps were heavy and fast. Someone was in a rush. Someone much bigger than me. The wind was blowing in an awkward direction. As nonchalantly as I could, pretending to simply be admiring the field to my right, I turned my head a little to catch a scent of whoever was behind me. My heart skipped a beat. Possum. I tried to calm myself. There were many possums in this town. It was probably just someone. "I'd run if I were you," said a deep, menacing voice from behind me, way too close for comfort. I could almost feel it on my neck, where my fur stood on end. This was the last straw. I fell on all fours and started bounding down the path as fast as I could, letting my earphones fall to the ground. I could hear the possum do the same. I could hear one of my earphones crunch loudly under his paw as he stepped on it in his pursuit. Adrenaline rushed through my body, though my brain was confused. What was happening? Why was he chasing me? Was it just a prank? It's amazing how much your brain tries to persuade you that nothing is wrong in precarious situations, as if it was afraid to accept the truth. I couldn't even do any evasive maneuvers. The path was straight and narrow. All that mattered was speed as we both sprinted down it. And the possum was faster. I felt his weight slam into me from behind. I felt his sharp claws sink deep into my fur, clutching at my delicate skin. I landed on my face on the cold, hard ground. We tumbled and struggled on the path, my vision a blur of wiry possum fur and pink, greasy paws. He finally subdued me, those same paws holding my muzzle shut firmly. The claws digging so deep into my flesh that I could see my fur turning red around them. Lying on my back, I stared wide-eyed at the possum on top of me, feeling like I was about to faint. He didn't seem to be much older than me, possibly still a student himself. I couldn't take my eyes off his wet, gleaming fangs as he panted in my face from the chase, a crazed look in his eye, his hot, moist breath my only source of oxygen. "Pathetic," he growled, licking his lips. "If not for the fear in your eyes, I'd think you wanted to be caught." He stood up and effortlessly dragged me into the bushes. I kicked and squirmed, but he seemed unperturbed by my efforts to escape. In the dark, thorny depths of the bushes, he once more lay on top of me, keeping me pinned against the ground with his weight. He grinned at me evilly. "Oh, don't look so dismayed." He leaned down and bit my ear. I flinched, sweating profusely as his sharp teeth nibbled on it tentatively, his wet, slimy tongue lubricating them on the inside, his spit oozing into my ear canal. "I would prolong this if I could," he whispered in my ear, making me cringe. "But this isn't the most private of places. We better get this over with quick." If I had the ability to do so, I would have screamed at the top of my lungs as his jaws opened unnaturally wide as only a possum's can, and he shoved my head right into his hot, dark maw, oozing with spit. The smell of spit, mixed with a faint memory of Dr. Pepper, assaulted my senses. His tongue rubbed against my face forcefully, forcing his spit into my eyes and nose and mouth as I sputtered, squirming with disgust and horror. His fangs grazed my neck, threatening to bite into it at any moment. A pleasured growl erupted deep in his throat. "Hey!" I heard a voice some distance away. A squirrely voice. Leave him alone! Another growl from the possum. Angry this time. Then I heard a bang. The possum spit my head back out, soaked in drool. The possum glared at me, then at something off in the distance I couldn't see. Then he ran off. When I crawled out of the bushes, he was nowhere to be seen. "Are you okay?" asked a squirrel on the other side of the fence. He had shot at the possum with a small BB gun, which I could see in his right paw. He then climbed over the fence and was kind enough to accompany me the rest of the way home. We've been best friends ever since. I stayed at home for a whole week after that, not daring to venture out, traumatized by the experience. Hazel, the squirrel who saved me, had been driving me to uni ever since. At least, until my contract expired and I could move closer to uni. To this day, I wonder what would have happened to me if Hazel wasn't around to save me. Did the possum really want to eat me? It's not unheard of for carnivores or even omnivores to revert to hunting other beasts, even in this day and age, though it's quite rare, especially in the UK. It's the last thing I ever expected to happen to me. I did report the incident to police, but nothing ever came of it. A week later, a student from my uni went missing. Their skull was found peeking out of a swamp in a nearby forest. That's all that was ever found of her. And the culprit has never been caught. Would this have been me if I hadn't been saved? I shudder at the thought of what she must have been through, crammed into that oppressively dark, slimy maw, on her way into the caustic depths of the possum's guts, with no one to save her. I was lucky, but it just goes to show, no matter how safe you feel, no matter how peaceful your town, no matter how many times you walked at night without being harassed by anyone, you should always stay vigilant. Because the next time might just be different. Next time you might just have a crazed possum following you with an insatiable hunger for flesh.